Okay, hey, I'm looking at your responses about Buddhism. And I want to connect this with what we just did in pragmatism, um, and say that of all the philosophies I have studied, I've found this one to be the most, one of the most powerful and interesting. So I'm going to hope to try to show what some of that is, or how I'm reading that and interpreting that, in hopes that it helps you, and also address some of the confusions, mainly around desire and the sense of the self. There's so many really interesting and rich traditions, and I should say before we dive in that this is a giant tradition with a lot of people that follow it, and there's a lot of different ways to process it. So we're going to kind of stay at the biggest picture and kind of address how this model that I'm going to put up here, which was the way the Buddha taught, how that relates to mental health issues and what we can do to actually, in the face of a dissatisfying life, or to see that life as we normally live it is going to be dissatisfying, and how desire plays in part of that, and different kinds of desire, different levels of desire. And I'm not meaning just like sexual or desire for like food, or different kinds of desire. I mean like different suppositions about what desire is, or where desire is coming from, the why behind your desire, and look at like and friends, and how that connects to it. So there's a good question about that. Okay, how we're going to do that is we need to look at how Buddha taught this as the Four Noble Truths, and these are noble in the regard that they are going to help you, ideally, as the Buddha says, kind of undo what's dissatisfying about life, or at least come to peace with it so you can more skillfully adjust through all of it. So I'm going to do it this way to kind of separate this out into four categories. And I want to show you, and connected to the last lecture on pragmatism, that the Buddha can kind of be understood as a physician. We're looking at this as a system of healing. And so the first thing you do when you go to a doctor is that you get a diagnosis. And then from that diagnosis, you want to know if, oops, I already messed this up. First, you want to know what the cause is. You want to know if there is a cure or not, and then you want the treatment. By the way, it's very interesting, I think, in the story of Buddhism, when the historical Buddha decided to sit underneath the Bodhi tree for 40 days. He apparently was enlightened on like day 33, but then it took him another 7 days to figure out how to communicate the insight that he had into the greater world. And this was the way that he did this. So this is his standard way of teaching. And it's really basic in the sense that the diagnosis, and I'm going to use the actual Sanskrit words here because it's better, is dukkha, which is usually translated as, actually we don't need quotes here, it's usually translated as suffering. But that's not good enough, because Buddha also includes in here all sorts of I'm going to actually separate it and spell it like this. It includes all kinds of dis-ease, not just physical illness and not just death, although that is included in this category. It's also the sense of having things that you want. So there is a giant list that Buddha says is dukkha, which is the diagnosis we're working with here. And it includes getting what you want. So you should probably be asking, well, what does that mean? Why would that be considered suffering? Well, as soon as you have what you want, what happens? Well, I don't know. If you're like me, you might be worried about keeping what it is that you want. So you're in a sense of worry. He defines this also, some worry, stress, anxiety, sadness, depression. All of these are dukkha. It sounds like dukkha. It sounds like it sucks. And that's Buddha's point, that this is just inherently unsatisfactory. There's something not right about this. What's the cause of this? The word in Sanskrit is tanha. And this is craving, otherwise known as desire, but here we want to get more specific. This is a selfish desire, i.e., a desire that wants something for yourself. So if I want to be happy for me, because I want it, that's a craving. It's a selfish craving. And when I start to get depressed, I don't want to be depressed. So I freak out and I get angry, and then that makes me more depressed. The cause of our perpetual dis-ease, Buddha says, is that we have a selfish desire for things, and we know we're never going to get what we want, and even if we do get what we want, we won't be able to hold on to it. And if we measure our happiness by all these things, by a limited, narrow self, it's going to cause us pain. This selfish desire, we see this self as separate from everything else. And traditionally speaking, this is true. I am not you, you are not me, I am not my mother. But actually, so interesting there. So Buddha is saying that it's our selfish desire. In other words, it's our stupid, delusional selfishness that causes us pain. And ironically, we are pining after and craving for a self that doesn't even actually exist. It's a trick of our human perception and survival biological instincts to feel like we're separate from the world. And in a certain sense we are, but in another sense we are not. Just like in a certain sense there is a border between the U.S.A. and Canada. It's there. You can't just cross it. Or between U.S.A. and Mexico. But in another sense, there is no border there. It's all the same thing, interconnected with lines that we've drawn. See Nietzsche's Will to Power and Foucault's idea of power knowledge to understand how borders have been drawn and the knowledge systems that those borders perpetuate, which was last week. Point being, Buddha's saying that there is a cause of our suffering, and that cause is selfish desire. And luckily for us, we can eliminate the selfish desire and thereby eliminate the symptoms of our suffering, of our dukkha. And in Sanskrit, there's a word that all of us know now, thanks to the ingenious marketing of Kurt Cobain, is nirvana. This literally means the cessation. It means the extinguishing of the flame of selfish attachment. This is the cessation of craving. But we need to be very careful here, and this is where a lot of people miss. It's the cessation of selfish craving, which supposedly, if we really cease to crave after ourself, what ends up happening is we end up broadening our scope of concern to other people as well. because we realize we're interconnected with them. And then might as well make this point now. Buddha isn't saying we need to get rid of all desire. He actually thinks there comes a certain point when you're like, I can take this anymore. I got to do something about this. This is not satisfactory. I want something more, not for me, but for my kids or my partner or my team. I want good friends, blah, blah, these things to help me. Those desires are good. In fact, okay, let's look at this. The treatment is what in Sanskrit is called the magga, which is the path. And there's 8 steps of this. In other words, if you're going to undo selfish craving, there's a lot that goes into it. You've got to consider but broadly speaking, you've got to consider what you do, your actions. You've got to consider what you say, your speech. You've got to consider how you meditate, which is the sense of your practice and your cultivation of certain states. And this also has to do with your energy that you have, your effort, and your reasons for why you're doing what you're doing. Interestingly, the word meditate is, in Sanskrit's bhavana. It actually means cultivation, it's a better translation to think of it in terms of cultivation, like you're cultivating a garden, or familiarization is how it's often translated from Tibetan, in the sense that you're familiarizing yourself with certain states of consciousness that help you undo selfish craving, that undoes suffering. So when you're meditating, you are cultivating or familiarizing yourself with loving kindness, caring for other people, with compassion, wanting to serve and teach and heal, attend to other people. You are familiarizing yourself with a kind of focus and presence that isn't so caught up in selfish desire that it causes undue suffering that you don't need. So now we're in a good position to ask, how does this connect with mental health? And this has been incredibly valuable for me, especially in my time with the therapist that I found in cognitive behavioral therapy, which is really about understanding the ideas and experiences that you have had that give you your sense of what it means to be a good person, or at least we're all acting according to role models that we want to be like. When I'm wanting to get to that place where I want to be, and sometimes where we want to be we haven't actually really thought about, or our role models that we're emulating, we're not actually consciously choosing them. And as soon as we see the role models that we're trying to be like, we're like, I don't want to be anything like that actually. The Buddha is saying, though, that we can choose better role models and actually work towards or desire to have less desire. And he calls this, there's a will to enlightenment. If I want to be enlightened, that will to enlightenment is a good desire. Except, it's interesting, if I want to be enlightened for me because I want it, that's not as good as wanting to be enlightened for everyone because everyone might be able to benefit. Do we see the difference? One desire is limited by my sense of self, and there's going to be more attachment and craving that comes along, like, I'm a better meditator than you, back off, versus, actually, man, I need some help. That kind of a thing, very different. Okay, so where was I? The sense that how this applies to mental health. So cognitive behavioral therapy is understanding the implicit kind of mental structures that we're striving towards and whether or not those are causing us pain or are is helping us. The other way to think about this is to look at the different features of our mind in terms of mindfulness. And this is what I did let's actually make some more room here. These are the Four Noble Truths. We're going to zoom in on the path. And that there are these mental factors that are each impermanent, and they are conditions, i.e. they rise from conditions, and they themselves are conditions to other things. So let's say I get sad. I'm bummed out because things are a bummer. In one way, if I can embrace my sadness as something that is helping me, it is a symptom where it's helping me identify what I need to do in order to do better. I can kind of undo the power and the sting that sadness has to turn into full-blown depression. i.e., there's two things that we should look at. ACT, which is acceptance and commitment therapy, also known as acceptance and commitment training. There's great material on this online. And mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is also used in anxiety. Here's how this works. We first need to work on acceptance so that we're not freaked out when we get anxious, and then we can commit to setting up different conditions to prevent the arising of further anxiety or depression, because we're not in control as much as we like to think so we are, or as much as certain companies would have us believe. Point is, if you are trying not to be anxious because you don't want to be anxious, because it sucks to be anxious, or you don't want to be depressed, and depression and anxiety comes up, what's your reaction? You freak out, you want less of it, you push yourself away from it, you are angry at that because you want this something else, right? You can undo that a little bit by, instead of being angry that you're mad, that you're depressed or anxious, you can accept it. Say, okay, this is just what's happening right now. It's okay that I'm depressed right now. It's okay that I'm anxious right now. And then see what it has to show you in terms of why is that? What conditions led to this depression arising in my experience? Instead, so my teacher would say, instead of saying, I have depression, you want to say, depression is arising, or these conditions of depression are arising. You woke up, you didn't decide to feel depressed, it just happened. Why? Because of all kinds of things that are going on, and that's really the last thing I should say. I could go on for days about Buddhism. It's a fascinating tradition. We didn't even get to the really interesting question about what happens when you die. Karma, which is this picture. I actually got this. This is the wheel of birth and death, which is incredibly wild in the sense that there are these hell realms and heavenly realms, and all is in the clutches of death. It's just the sense of impermanence. So if the Buddha is rejecting a self, if we don't have a self, what is it that's being reincarnated? Interesting. What I do want to say is that I am not a medical doctor. I am just fascinated in Buddhism as a psychological system, outlining the kind of healthier ways to interact with your beliefs and your experience in a way that doesn't create ownership of it or create new craving because it's not going the way you want it to go. There's a great quote that's backed up by psychological evidence that if we would just stop trying to be so happy, we would be a lot happier. If we would stop wanting things to go a certain way, it would be easier for us to accept the way things actually are. When we take these mental factors and then we're able to change them in ways that are going to help us undo selfish desire and then open up compassion for other people. And that is, there's a lot of, if you are struggling with mental health issues, you're not alone in the sense that it's not even really yours. It's a phenomenon that's happening with your brain, with your experiences, with everything that's given rise to it. And sometimes selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, Prozac, medications can be a huge help for some people, and for other people they don't help as much. Other people need a kind of longer term, more patient approach to their own mental health by understanding the conditions that give rise to the states that are unsatisfactory and beginning to undo the attachment to a separate self that perpetuates a certain kind of breed of suffering. And I know for me, that helps to not worry so much about myself. And when I am most depressed, I really try to look for ways that I can help other people until the depression passes. And I don't know that it does. But I hope this helps. It's a lot on Buddhism. There's a lot of stories to go into here. But I really just wanted to show that desire is okay if you're desiring not for a separately existing self. You're desiring for the enlightenment of all beings. That's good desire. If you're desiring to help your friend, that's good desire. And the Buddha would agree. It just depends on how you're attached to it, I guess. Okay, this is a pragmatic theory. Some people do read Buddhism as a system of pragmatism that issues a kind of scientific experiment that you can test. If you limit your selfish attachments, does it make you happier and help you feel better about life? I know for me, it does. It's not necessarily something that I can do. It's about setting in the conditions of the path, the practice, the familiarization, the sense of acceptance of what happens that helps. Okay, that's way longer than I thought. And let me know what you think. If you have questions, put them in the comments and I'll try to address them. Thanks. Bye-bye.